Hey y'all, I'm Ethan, and I'm here today to talk about opium uses throughout the history of the world. Opium is an opioid, the first of its kind, and what they're named after. It nullifies the pain and gives a rush of euphoria, among other symptoms. Opium has been likened to amphetamines like methamphetamine. It is considered to be a soporific, which means that you get much sleep, and an aphrodisiac, which means that you feel increased sex drive. It originates from poppy seeds, the flower of a popper, which is called poppy, a scientific name. And it tends to, the seeds, the fluid inside is extracted and dried, and that tends to be smoked, as we'll see later. And the cultures I'll be covering today are China, India, and Egypt. Sadly, primary sources and artifacts are limited in scope to what I could find, as most secondary sources led to other older secondary sources that kept leading to other secondary sources that until either couldn't find the articles or more importantly, they had no primary sources or were behind a page, even with U of A like access. And this is Egypt's relation to opium. So Egypt actually is closest to what is believed to be the origin of the poppy, which is either Balkans or Asia Minor. From there, they were domesticated. Nowadays, you will not find any poppies out in the wild. And said poppies were eventually brought through Mesopotamia, and they were originally found domesticated in the Balkans around 4000 BC, and they made it over to Egypt somewhere between 1600 and 1400 BCE, where upon the arrival, the crop spread far across Upper Egypt. It was used very frequently in religious cases and cults, like the wisdom and knowledge cult around Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom. It is very synonymous with Egypt in the ancient world. So synonymous, actually, that very potent chemical in opium was named Thebaid after Thebes, the city. My primary source for Egypt and opium come from the Ebers papyrus. This is a ancient Egyptian papyrus full of medical recipes, translated by Jorg Ebers into German. English versions of his translation indicate that opium, in the form of parts of the poppy plant, is used in a lot of things in ancient Egyptian medicine, such as headache relief, which is actually a precursor to modern day opioids, constipation, foot fungus, and even an increase in milk from a breastfeeding mother. Um, in the next are the artifacts. So there are two artifacts from ancient Egypt, both found in Kidian, which is a city in ancient Egypt, temples. One of them was a pipe found in the temple for the goddess Astarte, goddess of fertility, as well as which also that temple contains sculptures for of Bes, which is the god of many things, but one of which is childbirth. Um, this is supposed to be the aphrodisiac qualities of opium I mentioned earlier. And this is also found across the way from this pot, which it was across the street from the temple that had this pot inside of it. The temple has a symbol, though unnamed in the paper, of male divinity through fertility. And the idea is to once penetrated pot, that would very work quite similar to a bong, that would allow the inhalation of opium. India's relation to opium is very interesting as well. So both my secondary and primary source come from Monstuart Elphinstone. To be clear, Mr. Elphinstone is a primary and secondary source because he discusses things that he directly saw, like in the next slide. But he actually right here, but then he also talks about things that he heard from other Indians and from Indians at the time, and that is the secondary part of it. So the secondary, for example, is that he mentioned the practice of sati, which is a practice in India, I think that has been since outlawed, where when a husband would die, his widowed wife would burn on the same pyre that he would, the wife being still alive in this case. Some were willing, some were not. And the idea that they would spend the time together in the afterlife. Elphinstone claims that he has heard of in the Gujarat, which is this area of India. They frequently used opium to sedate, stun, stupefy. All these words are like used to do all these things to women, so that way they'd be less willing or like less willing to resist this by basically just being high. And that way they'd be cooperating with the whole being burned alive thing. He also mentions that, and this is, I think, his primary information, is that frequently India was actually unknown in the, or opium was unknown in the eastern part of India. And that really it was very common in this western area. And this makes sense. I mean, in poppies likely came, like were brought down through Afghanistan and Iran, and they probably made up a decent proportion of the influx through India, which meant that maybe by the time the British arrived, that only these Western counties and like countries knew of poppies. He claims in the East that only really the upper class knew about poppies, and the common folk absolutely had no idea. The artifact was a silver opium pipe. Not much is known about it. It's shaped like a peacock, as you can see right here, and it's very similar, likely, to the pipe that was found in Egypt, just simply more modernized and stylized. And now for the Chinese relationship with opium. Infamously, opium in China is a heavily contested topic. The British are often cited as the introducers of opium to China, and this is true on larger scales, but it is believed that through the Silk Road, opium had been flowing in through China since around the 8th century during the Tang Dynasty. Given multiple centuries of pressure, however, from the Silk Road, and then it was dissolved to the British importing in massive amounts of opium, it came to the head in a series of called Opium Wars that eventually ended up crippling the Qing, which was the dynasty after the British. The British eventually gave opium, introduced it to China through the Ming. They ended up collapsing under societal pressures and the mandate of heaven. People felt like they had been lost in their eyes, and then later same what happens to Qing after British influences such as opium led to a large societal collapse, and basically just and after the Qing, there was a complete dissolution of the Chinese dynastic system. Now, opium as a treatment in Chinese medicine came from the Ben Cao Gongbo, a common source of Chinese medications. Opium is used in terms of a panacea for bowel treatment, also as well in traditional Chinese medicine as a way to control bodily fluids, like seen in Egypt when it comes to constipation, and maintain a vital energy. It also clears out kidneys, helps muscle pains. There's a lot of it is related to the actual current day usage of opioids specifically. And in this last artifact, it is a opium pipe from the late Qing, early Republican era. Very similar to a lot of pipes that are Chinese history. It smokes the opium, very, very standard in fact. And these are my sources. Sources 3, 5, and 8 are my artifacts. 1, sorry about that. 1, 4, and 6 are my primary sources, as well as 2, 4, and 7. Or sorry, the latter group was my secondary sources, and these are my primary sources. All right, thank you for your time. Nice to meet you.